So let's try to focus on something close.
What up guys, it is Wednesday and I wanted to make a video for you. I've been sick for the last 24 hours, haven't really slept much, so I probably look like crap, but I want to do a video about cameras. I know that in recent times there are a lot more people in the FPV community and just in general that are posting videos online, and they want the best possible quality they can get, and they don't want to spend a crazy amount of money, and they also don't want to be carrying around a Canon 70D like Casey Neistat with a shotgun mic on top of it that weighs 8 pounds that you're just trying to hold at arm's length all day while drinking a smoothie, while riding your boosted board, and while flying your drone, because that's what you do when you're vlogging. So essentially, let's talk about what cameras I've used and what cameras I continue to use and what cameras I prefer over other cameras. So basically, first off, I started out with a Hero 4 Silver because you use what you have, and the Hero 4 was kind of something that I used already on my quads, and I used it as a vlogging camera, not a flogging camera. And I use my phone occasionally for things as well, because in some instances you just can't carry a camera in a certain place. So the best camera is, I know people have said this before, but the one that you use the most, or the one that you will use the most. Obviously for me it's not practical to carry around a 70D, so I try to use something a little bit more small, like a little smaller. So right now we're talking on the, this is actually a Hero 5, which has image stabilization, which is a really large improvement over the Hero 4, which did not have image stabilization. I like this camera a lot, and I use it on all of my Hawaii videos just because I was doing something with GoPro exclusively, and they wanted me to only shoot everything that I did there on the GoPro, either Session 5 or Hero 5. So I did that with that. I really like the camera. It's great. It works well. The audio quality is amazing, and yeah, it's a great camera. But I will say that for the best possible quality in picture, that there is a couple cameras that you can choose from. Now, the one that a lot of vloggers and a lot of YouTubers will tell you is like one of the best cameras out there is the Canon G7X. Now, there are a few variations of this. There's a G7X, and then there's G7X Mark II. The Mark II is just slightly different. To me, honestly, they say it has a faster processor. I didn't really notice it having any faster processor, but I did notice that the ring was no longer clicky. It has a switch now that you can turn on so that you get that click, or you can take that click off, or your ring function. It has an articulating screen that comes up so that you can see yourself with a touch screen as well. The articulating screen actually goes down at a 45-degree angle to get those above body shots. And I mean, other than that, they added a grip and a few little like cosmetic changes, nothing crazy. I have actually modified this one slightly to get as much performance out of it as possible. Obviously I blacked out all the logos because you got to do that. That's a Casey Neistat thing. If you're not gonna be cool if you don't black out all your stuff. And then I've also added the fluffy on the top of this camera. Now the fluffy on the top of this camera is basically to put a dead cat onto a point and shoot, because these do have internal microphones. They're not the greatest microphones in the world, but they are susceptible to pretty significant wind noise at times. So basically what I do is I go to Michael's and I buy fake fur, which looks like this, and it's got cotton on the back and fur on the top. I comb it out and I cut it into small little pieces like this, and then I take some thicker CA, like a Gorilla Glue, something a little thicker that's pretty quick drying stuff, and I will put it on the camera, and then I will stick that thing down there, making sure not to get any glue in the hole where the mic goes, because then obviously your mic will no longer work as it once did. And yeah, I mean, it works really well. I have not had a problem whatsoever with it getting in the way. I will say on the Mark II, it's a little bit in the screen, as you can see, but I mean, nothing crazy. So this camera, great camera. The only downside to it that I see is that you can hear the autofocus trying to focus on stuff in the audio itself on the camera, which is annoying. If you're in a quiet environment and it's going and making all kinds of racket, then it's annoying, but you get over it. There's give and take for everything. So this was my main camera to begin with. I had the G7X Mark I, and then I went to the G7X Mark II. I like the G7X Mark II. The battery lasts a long time. It's pretty much just your standard point and shoot. The picture quality is really good. It's got a lot of different features you can change. I do like the EV compensation on a roller here. Some of the other cameras don't have that, and I do like that. The large shutter button is awesome, and everything else is pretty much standard. The record button is really easy to find, and I like how it feels in my hand. It feels really quality, but I will say that this camera has its downsides, and like I said, It has the audio stuff where you can hear the autofocus trying to go, and the autofocus is pretty sluggish. So later in this video, I'm going to show you guys a side by side of my new camera, which is the Sony RX100 Mark V versus the G7X Mark II, and we're going to go outside and I'll walk side by side, and you can actually see what I'm talking about, how the autofocus is pretty sluggish. Now, the RX100 Mark V is my new vlogging camera, or my new camera in general. It's just all-purpose camera really, but I mainly use it for video. This camera blows this camera out of the water in my book. The Sony in the past was pretty comparable to the Canon stuff because they had similar autofocus, and the only real upside to the Sony was it did high frame rates, and it was a little more programmable, but it didn't have a touch screen. And I mean, yeah, there were like minimal differences. And if you were talking about the Sony Mark IV and the G7X Mark II, I would totally go with the G7X Mark II. But now that the Mark V RX100 is out, it's a no-brainer. The RX100 Mark V is the go-to camera for me, and a lot of other people have switched to this camera just because of the autofocus. The autofocus on this thing is astounding. It's not even set on the fastest setting out of the box either. You can make it focus faster, which I have done. And this camera without the touchscreen, I thought that was going to be a problem for me in the beginning because I was so used to the Canon, but at the end of the day, you don't really need a touchscreen. The only time you would ever need that kind of close-in focus stuff, if you're trying to focus on something for like a picture, but you can just pop it in a manual focus and do it just as easily. And for the most part, when I'm holding the camera out like this, I just want it to focus on me, and if I turn it to something, I want it to focus on that thing as quickly as possible, and then if I turn it back to myself, I want it to focus on me again. Where this Canon struggled a little bit. Sometimes in lower light it would struggle really bad. This thing freaking just kills it. So let me talk about a little bit of the modifications that I've done to it to make it the most optimal camera it can be. Like I said, I put little microphone muffs on there. I went to Michael's again and got that stuff and super glued it on there. And then I blacked out the logos. Obviously you need to do that if you're going to be cool. And then I put a little grip up here. I know they sell a Sony one, but I kind of like my stickers on there, so I made a little grip so that you can hold the camera a little more comfortably. And then I also put a screen protector on there because these screens are pretty fragile. They're like made of plastic and they do scratch fairly easily, so I put a screen protector on there. It's like $7. It's in the description below if you want to check it out. Very, very nice addition to the camera. Now, for the most part, both of these cameras, they weigh about the same. I have a scale here. I wanted to weigh them for you. Just not necessarily that it's a big deal, but when you're holding a camera out at arm's length all day, 20 grams can matter. So we'll weigh the G7X Mark II right now. It weighs 317.2 grams, and that's not very heavy. But when you weigh the Sony RX100 Mark V, it weighs 296.7 grams. So it's about roughly 20 grams lighter, which is not that big of a deal. But like I said, when you're holding something out at an arm's length all day, it can get fatiguing. And if you're holding a 70D out and then you switch to something like this, it'd be like, wow, okay, that's a completely different thing. And then one other thing to like my favorite camera ever, the one thing that I did have a gripe about in the beginning was the battery consumption was pretty high, but the thing is I didn't really know how to use it that well in the beginning, so I was like shooting in 1080-60 or 1080-120, and I was doing a lot of high frame rate stuff. Which this thing does do high frame rate. It does 480 frames per second, and it also does 960 frames per second, which obviously the fastest you can do on the Canon is 1080-60. So you can shoot continuously in 1080-120 on this camera. You can also do 4K for up to 5 minutes before the camera overheats, and I've actually had the camera overheat on me in some high frame rate stuff. You can do like up to 8 seconds at a high frame rate at either 940 frames or 960 frames per second or at 480 frames per second, and it's just awesome. I love it for the slow-mo. It adds a whole new dynamic to my videos, being able to do that slow motion stuff. The viewfinder is really cool as well. I will say the one downside to this camera that I see in the beginning anyways was that the lens is a little bit longer than the Canon, so you do have to hold the camera a little farther away from your face to get it to frame up properly. You do get a little more of an intimate feel if you are holding it close because it only crops like this much of your face, but at the same time, in the beginning I thought that was a downside. Now I'm coming to the point where I don't really care, and this is still my favorite camera. The one thing that I can say that I did modify aside from putting these little fuzzies on there is I put a piece of grip tape, skateboard grip tape, on the record button on the back of the camera right here. So I have a little bit of a textured piece to hit to make sure I'm recording. It doesn't make a noise, but sometimes you don't know if you're hitting the right button, and that little piece of texture helped a lot. So I hope you guys, I don't know, I guess learn something from my experience with both of these cameras. They are priced fairly differently. This is $1,000, $999. You can find them on sale, the Mark V's, for about $899 if you look hard enough. And then the G7X Mark II is roughly $649 all the way up to $700 depending on where you buy it. So yeah, there is a big difference in price, and I do say that this is a little bit better of a camera if you've never owned a camera before, as far as a point shoot or anything aside from your phone or a GoPro. And if you're going to go with something that's a little more, I would equate it to like the PC side, where you actually are modifying and putting in stuff where you want to control a lot more, then I would go ahead and go with the Sony, where this is more like a Mac. It just kind of works and does what you want it to do. So I'm going to do a little side-by-side comparison right now where I walk around the outside of my house with both of these cameras, and you'll notice that the Sony, for me, just looks a lot different. I love the way the Sony looks. Some people prefer the Canon look, but for me, I think the softer look is how I would put it, looks so much better on the Sony. So let's do that, and I hope you guys learned something. Again, if you didn't, put it in the comments, say what I didn't learn, or I don't know, just I'd love to hear from you guys. Put it in the comments below. If you could give me a like, that would be amazing, and I hope I don't throw up after I'm done with this video. Have a good night or day. Alright, so I'm basically going to do a walk around my house. The lighting is pretty poor, so the autofocuses may have some struggle grabbing onto certain things, but yeah, so this is the Canon, this is the Sony, and I'll just walk around with them side by side and point them at different things, and you can really see the autofocus and you can see all of these things working. You'll be able to hear the different audio and whatnot. So let's go ahead and get started, and just keep in mind that the Sony is in movie mode and the Canon is in auto mode because it doesn't have a movie mode. I don't know, it shouldn't make too big of a difference, but I just noticed right off the bat that the colors on the Sony versus the Canon are very different. So let's go.
So let's try to focus on something close. Alright, so the Canon did it, but the Sony was already there. Now let's focus on something else. Alright, let's walk around. So one thing you can do on the Canon is, like, if I really wanted to focus on this, I could touch the touchscreen and it would focus on that close-up object, where the Sony, you would probably have to go into manual focus if you really wanted to focus on that limb. But I mean, for the most part, for what I do with it, if I'm gonna take a picture or something, I'll just throw it in manual focus, and if I'm just walking around, I'll throw it in movie mode, in aperture priority. And yeah, it's nothing crazy, but I think you can tell that the Canon, the colors are a lot more contrasty to me, which some people like, and I thought I liked that in the beginning, but it's very, very harsh, especially on your face. So let me walk over here, and I'll turn the cameras around so you can see me and see what I'm talking about how it makes your face kind of, like, for the most part, you're not going to be touching the screen while you're vlogging. That's just, you just wanted to autofocus, and the Sony really excels in the autofocus. So let's turn these around. Here is the cameras on my face, and I will say that the Canon, the screen, the lens is a little bit closer in, so it doesn't crop in as hard as the Sony, but I think the Sony's colors and whatnot look a little better. But it's all personal preference. Some of you guys might love the Canon. But let me show you like the autofocus on my face. So both of these have had autofocus recognizing on my particular face. So I've logged my face into the face registry. So if I turn, we look at something and then we turn back, look at my face, it's pretty quick. Both cameras are pretty quick because they are recognizing my face and focusing on it really quickly. But yeah, one does some things better than the other, and for me, I just really like the Sony. It's a lot more money, but you know, at the end of the day, for what it does and what I use it for, it's a better option. Touch screen, the quality of the camera is just a really nice camera in general. And then there's the RX100. Occasionally there were different models. I mean, every year there's a model that comes out. So this is the Mark V. This is the most recent model. This is supposed to compete with the Sony, or sorry, with the Canon. Jesus Christ, I can't